Big welcome to my dear tea friends from all around the world to one of my new fall semester class, like we are in university. Hello Elizabeth, nice to see you. So I'm continuing on my journey of providing maybe the best concept of tea lessons or lessons in general, where I, the instructor, get to share my knowledge with you, and at the same time I get to drink some tea, while you, I hope at home, will also drink some. Maybe not, you don't have to make a new brew, otherwise you might not sleep if it's late in the eastern US. Maybe you can just simply make the last brew of the tea that you had today, then it won't be too strong. But do join me with a cup of tea, especially since today we are going to talk about Yixing teapots. It's a very vast subject, and there's so much to say that maybe we'll be frustrated at the end of the lesson that I have not touched on everything, but I want to start with more basic principles, and maybe we can do some further lessons to go a little bit deeper in this subject. But let's start to do something quite basic. Yixing, it's not only the name of the teapots, but it's also a town that is in the Jiangsu province, and the capital of the Jiangsu province is Nanjing. But what is more important about Yixing, it's a fairly big town, over 1 million people. It's at the delta of the Yangtze River, and this location is important because what makes Yixing special is the clay, and this clay is an accumulation of minerals that have been transported from inside China to the Eastern Sea, and they landed then in this Yangtze Delta. So after several thousands of kilometers and over millions and millions of years of accumulation, then layers and layers into the ground, and this provided a very unique type of clay that you can only find in Yixing, and which makes this clay so special. Okay, but so before going millions, so we already went millions and millions of years back in time. Let's come back a bit closer now to our history about Yixing teapots. When did it start? Now, a funny thing, maybe you've sometimes noticed that there are some statues of Lu Yu with an Yixing teapot. Ha ha ha! Just, this is completely wrong. It's a complete anachronism, because in the Tang Dynasty, when Lu Yu lived, they were not using teapots. They were still kind of boiling the water and then putting the grinded green tea into it. So and then taking it with a spoon in cups. So they were not using any teapots during Tang Dynasty, and not even during the Song Dynasty, since they were whisking the tea in bowls. So actually what makes sense is that the teapots appeared when the tea was not whisked anymore, and this happened in the Ming Dynasty. Ming Dynasty is 1368 to 1644. Because the emperor decided he will not accept green tea as to do powdered green tea as a tribute anymore, and all the tea had to be given as loose leaves. And at that time, during the Ming Dynasty, the all the green tea, all the tea was green tea only, and so at that time they were drinking green tea in larger teapots, and so these teapots appeared only around the 15th century, so a little bit after the introduction of this new method of now brewing tea instead of whisking it. Yeah, that's what we can say. But what is interesting is that actually you can make a case that teapots did find their origins in earlier times, maybe in Song or even Tang dynasty, and because actually they are the descendants of this object. Maybe you recognize this is an ewer. So it was used, or ewer, I never know how to pronounce it in English correctly. So this is, or this was used in the Tang and Song dynasty for the hot water, and to add on in the bowl to whisk in the Song dynasty, especially. So these ewers, they look a bit like teapots actually. Yeah? They have a handle, they have a spout, an opening. So it was actually quite easy to, when you had this shape, to evolve into this shape. And this is how you can trace the inspiration of teapots to the ewers, especially in the Ming Dynasty. Teapots were large because they were drinking green tea, and the ewers were large also. So probably the very first ones who tried, they simply put some green tea in it, hot water. Yep, actually it's good, and then they adjusted the shape, and it evolved into teapots. Okay, so this is our link in history between ewers, the ancestors of teapots, which then only appeared in the 15th century in Yixing. So there are now not so many teapots left over from that era. One that is quite famous is at the Metropolitan Art Museum in New York. I invite you to see it if you are in New York. It's the shape, the design is very unlike our teapots of today. You will also see that its clay is much more granular, and the shape was quite big, because they only used it to brew green tea. Okay, now number 2. Let's continue with a bit of vocabulary. We hear Yixing, so Yixing is the name of the town, and also zisha, zisha teapots. Now, zisha has several meanings. It can mean simply this kind of clay, a purple clay, but actually it's also a generic name for all the Yixing clays. So even a Duani or a Juni or a Hongni, actually they all are part of the zisha family. Zisha family, zisha clay, actually is a broad name for all Yixing clays. So this can sometimes cause some confusion, because you hear zisha, but people say, oh, this Juni is a zisha. So technically it's correct, just Juni is one type of Yixing or zisha clay. And Zeni, zisha, is also one part of zisha. I hope it's a little bit more clear now. Okay, and continue. Let's yeah, I mentioned some clay names. I should give you some more details. So Hongni, red clay. Juni is a stronger, harder type of red clay, and Duani is also a poetic name for yellow, so a yellow clay. And sometimes you will hear also the name Luni, green clay, because actually when you look at the rough clay, the raw clay, the stones before they are transformed, and especially before they are fired, for Duani, the yellow type of teapot, actually it is first green when it's raw, when it's not fired, and it turns yellow after firing. And for Hongni and Juni, what is interesting is that the clay itself is more yellow, a little bit orange, and it turns red when it is fired. As for the Shadzeni purple clay, it is already pretty purple before, and it remains or it becomes even more purple after firing. Now, another important thing we have to know is how do we describe our teapot. So the teapot has lots of important parts. We have the knob. On top of the knob, a chi kong, and a hole for the air. We also have the spout. Now, what I'm using now, I'm holding it with by the handle. The rest is the body. But in the body we can distinguish, here on top is the shoulder and the jian, and below will be the quanzu. Quanzu is the circular foot of the teapot. So we see lots of names that refer to a human person. The shoulder, the body, the foot. We can also realize that sometimes this bar is looks a bit like a ear, or that the mouth, the spout. I forgot one. Is this shui qiang, this water wall? So this kind of wall, circular wall that will also be in contact with the water, with the tea inside. Okay, now let me start to make some, to warm up my water so that I can also drink now, and show you how it is made. Now for the shapes of teapots, we distinguish into three main kinds of shapes. One, we have the most common are the circular shapes, where the teapot is mostly round. Let's, like also this zisha. Oh, another one here. This one's also kind of round. Up, lots of round. Then there are also shapes that are geometrical, and so you have some square, some hexagonal, triangular shapes, and you have shapes that are inspired by nature. You have the melon shape, and Also this like log shape with decoration made of flowers, or here the knob is like a wood, piece of wood coming out. Also the handle is designed like wood. So inspired by nature, it can also be more like a flower or flower decoration. So there are these three major types of shapes: round, symmetrical, and inspired by nature. In the shapes, actually, so we see that this shape is very popular. Here I have three examples. Sometimes called standard or shui pin. Shui pin means that it can float on water. So one of the way to you can try it is you fill a bucket of water and you see if it will float or not. If it floats, it simply means that the maker has made a good balance in terms of weight between the handle and the spout. And also you will notice that the top of the spout is aligned with the top of the mouth of the teapot and the handle here. This should also be on one line for this kind of shape. This kind of very basic standard shape that is very popular, also because it's very functional, very practical. Okay. And speaking of names, so standard shaping, sometimes the names of teapots are inspired by poetry, and in this case for zisha it was inspired by one of the four most beautiful Chinese ladies in history, the beautiful zisha. She gave her name to this teapot. Probably the maker was inspired by her when he made this teapot. Now, this is written Yixing Zhongguo, but finally this is not an Yixing teapot. Yixing teapots are so popular and so famous that they are imitated, and this is like an imitation, a copy from Chaoshan. So not made with Yixing clay, but with Zhuantai, with a local red clay in Chaoshan. This is actually suitable for very roasted teas. Okay, now let's come to a very important part of the teapot, is how do we use it? So when it's cold, and today it's starting to be a bit cold in Taipei, we first preheat it on the outside to avoid a thermic shock, because the outside can expand without problem, and only then do we preheat the inside. Okay, and now while it's preheating, I'm getting some Hung Shui Oolong from Shan Lin Xi from 2018. Very nice. These are very large leaves, so I'm not taking too many. Okay, now the important part. How do we hold the teapot? Let me first empty this, because there are many ways one could hold a teapot. I see people put their finger inside the hole. Actually, this is not correct, because you're not going to hold it in a very stable way, and it's also not that elegant. So the way we want to do it is with these two hands, with these two fingers, keep it here, and with that one it will block the handle below, and with my index I can then even control the lid like this. See? Now so here we are training ourselves. The idea is you want to keep always a balance. You don't want to pour on one side or on the other. You want to really pour in a balanced way, so that the leaves stay right in the middle and don't go on one side or the other. And you can best achieve this with this way of holding the teapot. Okay? So the idea is simply cover the bottom of your teapot, and that's why I'm using this little plate. It's roughly the same size as the bottom, so if I fill my plate with leaves, it will exactly cover the bottom of my teapot. Already very nice Christmas cookie smells. Important always is really a very hot temperature, and the Yixing clay is going to help, because the clay keeps the temperature much better than porcelain. So the leaves are going to open much more easily. So I don't have to use too much strength, even though they are rolled, but because they are roasted, so I pour quite slow. And because these leaves are roasted, I'm not going to pour water now on top. This would make the roast aromas come out a little bit too strong. Now, the drawback compared to a Gaiwan, you cannot see the leaves or the water. The only place you can see a bit the water is here at the end of the spout. The level of this water will also give you an indication when the tea is ready, when it goes down. But you can also try to smell the the tea, the aromas. Since it's porous, the some smell is coming out, and when you think it's done, you may start to pour. Now, I will not start here because it's in the very beginning that the water tends a bit to be the most difficult to control. So I prefer to pour here, so that if some water spills, it will spill in this teacup. So you see, I try to be very balanced, and my teapot never like this, never on one side or the other, but always straight. And now, especially at the end, with my index, I open up the lid. This adds more air to help the tea come out, and it will also make the tea smoother. See? Okay. The leaves have started to open. Want some tea? Okay, now let me have some. Nice nutty smells. It's still also hints of freshness and sweetness. It's really all this complexity of Hung Shui Oolong, the good balance between freshness, fruitiness, and the roast, but in a very harmonious way, melted together, especially thanks to this teapot. Now, to study about teapots, there are many books. Now, one of the first books I got is this one, Xuan Hao Hu Pao Hao Cha from Teapots. So, choose a good teapot to make good tea. Now, here basically the advice that Teapots gives is the way you look at a teapot to brew tea, not for collecting, not for investing, but really to brew tea, because the major, the basic function of a teapot is to brew tea. So the priority for choosing the good teapot is number one, the clay, number two, the shape and size, and number three, it's the maker. No? And maybe number four will be the price. So Teapots puts the clay even ahead of the maker, even though for many collectors of teapots, they will first wonder, what is the seal? What does it say? Is it by a famous potter? Is it Gu Jinzhou, the most famous potter of the 20th century, or is it Chen Mangchen, Yigong, a famous old potter, or is it number one factory? So actually, all this is much less important than the clay that is used, according to Teapots. If your aim is to make tea and enjoy the tea. Having some more. Yeah, very nice on a little bit cooler day. Now the shape also and the size will have an impact, and depends on how much you plan to brew. Is it for yourself or for many people? A trick also is that with a larger teapot you can always brew less, but with a smaller teapot it's a bit more difficult to brew more. Then you have to brew more often, faster, maybe with more leaves. Or more concentrated, but with a very large teapot you can always brew it half, and then you have like a teapot that is half the size. Okay. Now, because the subject of teapots is so vast, T. Parker also had this other book about teapots with more colorful pictures. And of course, what is interesting is to go a bit in the past. And for the past, we have in Taiwan the National Palace Museum with a collection of Chinese emperors. So I've made a guide about this. You can find some teapots there. Now, if you don't have the guide, this is, for instance, one of these Yixing teapots that landed in Taiwan. So you will notice it is very decorated, very beautiful, with colorful enamels on decoration in flowers, different colors. Now this one is from the early Qing Dynasty Kangxi reign, and it landed in Taiwan because the collection of the emperors came during the civil unrest from the Beijing palace to Taiwan to keep it in secure hands of the nationalist government, and they were not able to take everything with them. And what is interesting is that some of the teapots were left in Beijing, and there is this book that shows a collection of Yixing teapots that are in Beijing, and it is interesting because these teapots here are much more common, much more late Qing. So not from their perspective, they were not so old, not Kangxi, but late Qing, and they are a little bit less decorated. These actually, these teapots were left back in Beijing because they were in the kitchens. They were not part of the collection of the emperors, but they were in the kitchen and they were used to make tea for the emperor. And therefore, when the nationalist government chose which were the important artifacts to save, they were not considered as that worthy to be saved, and because they were also already at that time simply part of the kitchenware. I think that's also quite fun. There's another book, also The Art of Yixing Purple Clay Wares, and this one is not by T. Parker, but it's very interesting to see the different shapes. This one really goes much more in depth into the different shapes of teapots. Maybe I'll do a more in-depth lesson one of these days. Let's do another brew and show you again how to handle the teapot. Now for the second brew, the leaves have already opened up a bit. I have to look where would be the best place to hit them, to open them further. See where they are not so well opened yet. I think it's on this spot. The teapot is still a bit warm. This really is the property, an interesting property of Yixing clay, that it retains the heat for a long time, and the more the leaves are warm, the more they are going to open and release their flavors, and that's why Yixing is such a good tool to make tea. At the same time, these teapots are porous, and this porosity helps to absorb some of the rougher aromas and makes the tea much smoother, much sweeter. Okay. One could preheat the teacups, but it's not that cold yet, so I'm not doing it today. For the second brew, it's going to be a bit shorter since the leaves have already opened up. I'm going to try to monitor now my water level at the spout and try to smell if the sweetness comes out. Okay. Okay, there's another book that actually is on my website, tea-masters.com. It's a affection for appreciation and collection, the forgotten stories of purple clay. This book is about the Yixing Teapot Museum in Hong Kong. So it was published in Hong Kong. It's in both English and Chinese. So that's one of the few books that is easy to read for us. The others that I've presented are all in Chinese, which makes it a bit more difficult. And so it introduces lots of different stories about this museum and how the museum helped to preserve this history of Yixing teapots and spread their fame in the world and also back to China, since it had to endure the cultural revolution that destroyed lots of culture, ironically. And yeah, it's also an interesting book to read different stories about Yixing teapots and how they are used with good Chinese tea. second brew is also very harmonious, very deep and sweet. Again, now the whole point of using a teapot, an Yixing teapot, is to make the tea and make tea better than with any other vessel. So to cut to the chase, if you want to know if your teapot is a good teapot, simply compare how it brews the tea that you want to brew with it with a guy one, and if the teapot wins, then it's a good teapot. If the guy one wins, then either you have a problem with your technique, or it's actually a problem with your teapot. Now it could be two problems. One, that it's not a good teapot, or also that it's not a suitable tea for the teapot. This can also happen, that sometimes a very good teapot is not suitable for all types of teas, and maybe it's simply the tea that you're using with your good teapot that is not the right choice. But this is another very large field. I hear that the music has stopped playing. This means we are approaching the end of the class. Let me also introduce the music I've just played. It's an album by Esther Ofarim, a very beautiful voice and singer from, actually she's from, she did a lot of her career in Germany, but she, of course, here is singing in Hebrew, very beautiful Hebrew songs, and I wanted to use this occasion because last week was Shana Tova, the new year for the Jews, and on Sunday it will be Yom Kippur. So I'm raising my glass to all my Jewish friends around the world. L'chaim. And so I hope you enjoyed this introduction to Yixing teapots today. If you have some questions, leave them as remarks on this video, and maybe, probably, most likely we'll do another one to go a bit further in depth, because there are still lots of information that we have barely touched. But I hope that you have now had a better appreciation for the Yixing teapots, and that you have seen how to use it, and all about the names of the teapot. It's a companion for tea lovers. Sometimes a bit can become an obsession, so you have to be careful. It's better to be obsessed with tea than with teapots. But teapots, are the major brewing vessel for you, so it's normal that we can start to feel some attachment. Like also with, you can see if the maker gave it the name of a beautiful lady, zisha. It really is a relationship of love between tea maker and tea brewer and the teapot. But it is there to make tea, and I'll continue to do that. And wish you good night. See you next week for another tea lessons. Bye bye.